charcoal bark. Yeah. That's pretty good.
Good.
I like it.
All right.
Yeah,
Does this work?
it's good. It looks clean. I mean, just as visually.
Yeah.
All right. All righty. How we looking, man? Am I in the way?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Just check it
All
again.
right. So like I said yesterday, pretty much 3 parts to this. One, get to know you and how you grew up and all this other stuff, what drives you, what you're passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
We can get into, a little bit about, the death penalty and your overall feeling about it, why you feel a certain way. Did you always feel that way, and then we can talk about what's going on in the state of Ohio, talk about what's going on currently with Oklahoma, and and some of the questions I'll ask you to put it in context of people with intellectual disabilities, and I know that's not your area, but like we talked about yesterday, if it
Yeah.
affects, the death penalty affects those who
Oh,
have
yeah.
ID. So, so I think we'll be good there. I have about 30 questions. We're not going to ask all of them because you're going to answer a lot of them throughout the interview. Tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Sure. Well, my name is Abraham Bonowitz. Most people call me Abe. I grew up in Bexley, Ohio, which is a suburb of Columbus, and that's where I live now, having moved back here after being all over the country. I grew up in a observant, kosher Jewish home, although that's not my identity right now. But certainly I identify as Jewish, but that's my spiritual practice is irrelevant to religion. So, I've got a wife and a son and 2 cats and a dog and a house in Bexley, and that's who we are.
Yeah, just normal, average American family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what exactly do you do? What's your title? And tell me a little bit about Death Penalty Action.
Okay. So I am the executive director of Death Penalty Action, which is a national secular activist-oriented organization in the United States that works to shine a spotlight on executions and stop them where we can. In the United States predominantly, obviously we're concerned about executions everywhere, but our focus is here. And we were really created to give everyday people something that they can do about the death penalty. And then there's levels of engagement that people can take, all the way from just simply signing a petition or making a donation to coming out and being at protests with us or helping us put together programming and do speaking tours, whatever the opportunity and the need is. We're happy to have people be a part of that. And that was really our inspiration, was we want to make sure that there's something for people to do who want to do something. And we try to provide a variety of opportunities. We were created in 2017 when it became clear that there would be a resumption of federal executions. And we built the organization initially on that idea, but it very quickly became evident that there was a need for our kind of leadership at the state level too. So at this point, today, 23 states have abandoned the death penalty. 12 never had it. 9 have legislatively abolished it, and that's been a part of what I've been a part of through my career. And then 3, the courts have thrown it out: New York, Delaware, and Washington State. So that's how we get to 23. The rest run everywhere from having it on the books, but really not having anybody on death row, to
It's okay.
well, she's gonna. Is the microphone picking this up?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You need to go take care of it?
If you could just go let her in.
Okay. All right. No problem.
All right, I will. Good.
Is she gonna be? Should I put her away, or is
Well, if she's standing there, that's okay. If she's sitting there, that's okay. I don't see her
Okay.
at all.
just making sure. So
Cool.
good. So there's 27 states that still have the death penalty, plus the military and the federal government, and most don't use it. Most might have a few on death row. The death penalty is on the books, but they just don't use it. And then there's a handful of states that are actively executing, and that's at this moment growing in terms of states that haven't had executions in a long time and are implementing old mechanisms for killing prisoners that, I say new because they're new to the moment, old because that's what we've done in the past, and are bringing those mechanisms back in order to resume executions. So that has created a lot more work and opportunity to help people understand the failings of the death penalty simply by, shining a spotlight on them. There's always a story to these people that we're killing and to the people that they did kill, if they killed somebody, because we are executing innocent people too. And more often, almost every case, there's some space where people fell through the cracks. There was some issue going on in their life, and it wasn't caught. Or if it was recognized, the wrong people the people that recognized it were unable or unwilling to do something about it. And that's especially true with the intellectually disabled and other people with handicaps of various sorts, or addictions, or, you name it, all the things that can go wrong in a person's life, or that can impact a person's capacity, can be seen in these cases of the people that we're executing.
So you think, it seems to me that when I look at some of these cases, you get the clemency dockets or documents and stuff, and you read their story, it seems like the parole boards, they just don't care. It seems that way. I don't know what they're
Certainly
thinking.
what we've seen is, the problem with clemency hearings is they're seen by the prosecution and the government that they need to put the prisoner on trial again. They have to prove what they did. They have to tell us how awful it was. They have to bring the victim family out to tell us how terrible it was and that they want the execution. And in presenting it that way, there's a much lesser look at who that person is now, because the person that we're executing, this is 20 or 30 years later, sometimes more, and it's not the same person. And certainly, they don't have the ability to continue to hurt people. That's the thing about our prison system, incapacitates people, and if it's being properly managed and resourced, then they recognize when somebody's a danger and they deal with that person before they commit crimes in prison. So what we see is people that, for example, we're doing this interview in August of 2022, and James Coddington just got a very rare recommendation for clemency in Oklahoma. And he's, very remorseful, very contrite, very apologetic. But the interesting thing about his hearing was that the government testified or presented by Zoom. No victim family members showed up. So that piece of it was much less, and they were able to focus on his model behavior in prison. He's trusted by the prison staff to do a number of jobs outside of his cell. He's, by all accounts, lived a violence-free life in prison, and is helpful to others and others. And that's what we need to be looking at when we're talking about clemency. Now, contrast that with Texas, for example, where the prisoner doesn't even appear at a clemency hearing. They might interview the prisoner prior to, but it's all done behind closed doors. In Oklahoma, it is the public can attend, the public can watch on Zoom. In Ohio, the public can attend if you get permission ahead of time. Every state's a little bit different, but in Texas, it's all behind closed doors. You don't know what's happening. Same thing with the federal government. The defense is given the opportunity to present their clemency package to demonstrate in writing or with videos why this person deserves mercy. I think the real question is this person a threat, a danger to us? And if not, then we don't need to kill them.
Mm-hmm. Good. So, why are you so passionate about, the death penalty? Was there something that you have you always felt that way, or what's the deal there?
What burns me up more than anything else is seeing injustice. And you're talking to a person who used to be in favor of the death penalty, and adamantly so. I have no personal experience in my family in recent generations. Of course, we have the Holocaust and all that, but we've not had any real crime victims or victimization in our family that was directed at us specifically, right? And so, my own personal experience, my bike was stolen when I was a kid. That's the closest I've gotten to crime as a victim. And so when I was confronted as an adult with the issue, I had gone to a meeting on the campus of Ohio State University. I wasn't expecting somebody to be talking about the death penalty, but there she was, a criminal defense attorney speaking about the death penalty, and I argued. I said an eye for an eye, and I'll pull the switch myself, and this is the United States. We have the best justice system in the world, and I had no idea how wrong I was. But,
Where's that? Or is that a phone?
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
Sorry.
Give me 1 second just to make an adjustment. Hang on.
You were talking, I was thinking, would it be better if the families, the victims' families, did not show up at the clemency hearings? But then how do you do that? Deny them the opportunity to, give.
well, that's it. Agreed.
Yeah.
But really, well, let's talk about the victims
Mm-hmm.
when we're ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to continue with your passion about the death penalty and everything.
Yeah. So for me, in trying to prove the anti-death penalty people wrong, I found out that everything I believed about the death penalty, the truth was the opposite. I thought we had a system that was fair. I thought we had a system that always got it right. I thought it made sense economically to execute rather than to imprison, and I was wrong. And the thing that changed my mind and made me jump from one side of the fence to the other was learning that you have to kill in a county that can afford a death penalty trial to even face the death penalty. In fact, that is the number one indicator of whether or not you might get a death sentence, is where you commit your crime. kill in a rural county that doesn't have a large tax base, and they simply can't afford a death penalty trial, which is where the high cost of the death penalty is really weighted. It's upfront in the trial. When a prosecutor decides that he or she is going to seek a death sentence, they're deciding to spend at least twice as much just on the trial, which itself is a roll of the dice. And even if you get a conviction and a death sentence, half of all the death sentences are overturned during the appeals process. So, and that can be challenged all the way up to the point of execution. And the amount of resources that have been wasted, trying to execute a handful of people and actually executing, a small percentage of those who are eligible for the death penalty, all those resources could be better spent on prevention efforts, on keeping people from falling through the cracks, and also doing better to serve the needs of victim families.
So I was going to get into the victims' families a little bit later, but let's talk about them right now. Because one of the things is that, a lot of people think, oh, you just want to set these people free and you don't really care about the families, the victims' families. I mean, that doesn't seem to be true, but how do you feel about that? I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah, well, and I enjoy when people give me the opportunity to share with them, because I consider myself to be a victim advocate. Mm-hmm. Okay, and in that, I'm working to get more resources to victim families, and also to lessen their pain to the extent that's possible. And what do I mean by that? When there's a death sentence, we're asking you to put your healing process on hold. We're saying, wait until we kill the guy, then you'll feel better. But you've got to wait 2 or 3 or more decades, which is how it works. So you put your healing process on hold for, if you believe that, start that part over again. If you believe that an execution is going to help you, you're also going to have to wait a long, long time until something that may actually come all the way up to the last minute and then still not happen. And if you're putting your healing process on hold until then, you're actually tearing up yourself. Because there's a Chinese proverb: he who seeks vengeance should dig 2 graves, right? Because you're preventing yourself from healing. We'll never be able to bring our loved ones back. We'll never be able to correct that piece. But what we can do is move forward in life. And that doesn't mean that we don't want to hold people who've committed horrible crimes accountable. We absolutely are for accountability, and we want those people to be held accountable. We want a society to be safe from them for as long as it takes until they're no longer a danger. And in some cases, we have to throw away the key. There are some people who, as they presently exist, should never be free. But there's also people who can serve their time and have served their time and come out and be productive citizens. That's most people just haven't really even thought too much about this, if at all. And that's the challenge, is giving people the opportunity to think about it and actually to make informed decisions. The challenge really is that people have a gut reaction, as I did. You hear about some horrific crime, somebody raped and killed a little girl in your town. That person deserves whatever they get coming. The question we have to ask is, do we deserve to give it to them? Can we trust ourselves? And by that, really, can we trust government with the power to get it right? Not just guilt or innocence, but also culpability and fairness. The 4 words carved into the face of the U.S. Supreme Court building are equal justice under law. If that's the bedrock foundation of our legal system, we don't have it. And anybody who has ever encountered the legal system, criminal or civil, knows that what matters most is how much money you have and if you know the judge. That's every day in the county courthouse downtown. the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney are riding in the same elevator. Often, things are decided in that elevator about what's going to happen and who's going to get what. And don't take my word for it, but we've seen this, and I can't prove it, but I can tell you that that's what we know. Is, hey, we're going to play golf on Saturday, and by the way, let's do 10 years. Everybody cool with that? Probably shouldn't use that part, but
well, it's very good though. I mean, it's something that you have to, if you're talking about transparency, if you're talking about equal justice under the law, let's decide based on the facts, not based upon the relationship that I'm buddy with the prosecutor or the judge. And
it's not supposed to be that way.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be that way.
And it often isn't that way. But then we've seen cases, trying to think of where it was. There are situations where the judge and the prosecutor are having an affair, or something gets in the way that is totally unrelated to the system working the way it's supposed to. And everything from, the judge having a bad day. There are studies that have shown that if your case is heard in the afternoon, you get a lesser benefit than if you are heard in the morning when everybody's fresh. That's a reality. So, when we're coming to talk about capital punishment, you would also think that they would be much more intent on making sure it's fair and equal. But that's where we're seeing also cheating and lying and hiding evidence and, just anything they can do to get the win, which is shocking, especially when you understand that a prosecutor's job is to do justice. A defense attorney's job is to represent his or her client to the best of their ability. But the prosecutor's job is to do justice. And if that means that you recognize that you've got the wrong person, or that you're going after somebody because you can, but not necessarily because they're the worst of the worst, that's a problem. People should recognize that as a problem. In some states, we have they call it in Texas, the law of parties. If you're present when a crime is committed, when somebody's murdered, but you didn't you're not the actual killer, you can still get the death penalty. We're going to see a case like that very soon. Paul Story, do you know about that case?
Wow. No.
Okay, well, you need to look in. That's a case that you could be tracking.
Yeah.
It's a Texas case. He just got denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. So next in line, he's going to get a date. He is absolutely intellectually disabled. I'm friends with his mother, Marilyn Grant, and she, she's part of the challenge. She's very Christian and believes that God is going to intervene, and that's probably a part of why Paul is on death row, is because he too believed that God would, take care of things. But at the end of the day, Paul Story is not the actual killer. And one of the other things that's come up in that case is the victim family didn't want the death penalty, but that was not heard by the jury. They were not allowed to bring their opposition of the death penalty forward during the trial, and especially not for somebody that didn't even kill their loved one. So that's a very real thing too. And people don't think about it, and they say, well, if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. But if you're intellectually disabled and you're tagging along with your buddies while they're doing something, and you don't even really understand what they're doing or what that could mean, then how can we be holding you culpable?
Well, that's interesting because that reminds me of the Jerome Bowden story. And when Paula first told me, and they found the murder weapon under this other guy's house. The woman that was murdered, she told some of her neighbors that, hey, if anything happens to me, this guy is going to be the reason. And they pinned it on Jerome Bowden because he was older.
I'm hearing some humming.
Oh, really?
What's that?
I want to stop for 1 second.
Okay.
It's probably my setup.
No,
Roll.
I do believe that there are spiritual messengers and spiritual travelers,
Yeah.
and I can assure you I'm alive because the angels around my car. But that's all. Different people believe different things, but I've had enough experiences to understand that there is a God, there are spiritual presences, and I'm not in charge.
Right. Right. So, what are some of your thoughts about, people on death row with intellectual disabilities that are still being executed despite what the Supreme Court has said in Atkins versus Virginia 2002. So here it is 20 years later after the Supreme Court, has said, hey, you can't kill these people. We're still executing them, So, I mean, what does that say about our society? What does that say about our government?
Joe, are we good?
Yeah, sorry. I can do that.
Well, it says that what's more important is this idea that an execution is justice than the reality of the bedrock foundation of our legal system, equal justice under law. If we're adhering to that, then we can't be executing people that have diminished capacity. I mean, it's that simple. Gilbert Prostel was executed in October. Gilbert Prostel was executed in Oklahoma earlier this year, and I sat and watched his clemency hearing. And this is a man who spoke at a fourth grade level, and there was a member of the Oklahoma Board of Pardons who likes to question the prisoners, and he always asks them gets into detail, why this, why that, say this, and you can see that he was confused and tripped up in how he was responding. And if that can happen in a 20-minute interview that you've been preparing for months, then there's something that is not the same as a person that has a full capacity. Now, I'm not a person that evaluates people for this sort of thing, but I know, if I try to manipulate a fourth grader into doing something that I want them to do, then I'm a bad guy.
Yeah.
I'm a bad guy. And here's the government gonna hold a person that is at a fourth grade level to the same account as a fully functional, full capacity adult. We have to think about that too, because studies of cognition and brain capacity and brain development now help us understand that a person who is healthy and normal, quote unquote, brain development is still happening as late as age 25. And then we get onto the decline. I'm 55, and we can see what's happening. So, especially in my family, we've got Alzheimer's, and that's going to hit me one of these days. So the point is that everything is fluid, everything shifts. But if you only get to a certain level, then it's not about you and what you deserve. It's about us and how are we going to treat the other. How are we going to treat the person that's not fully at a full capacity? If you wouldn't try to manipulate a fourth grader into doing something, or hold a fourth grader responsible in the same way you would hold a senior in high school or a college graduate responsible, then how can we be executing them?
I'm sorry if I'm hearing that hum again. It sort of stopped, started in the middle. I apologize. I just don't know.
We talked about the government and what does it say about the government and our society as far as people with intellectual disability. So let's talk about the great state of Ohio now.
Okay, you think you got what you were looking for with that? And do we need to do any of that over again because of the microphone issue?
Well, let's yeah, you're probably right. Let's go back and answer that question just one more time, and then we can move forward.
Which question?
And so, what does it say about our government, our society, when we're still executing people with intellectual disabilities, despite what the Supreme Court has said? You know, in 2002, 20 years later, we're still executing people.
Yeah, well, it says that some government officials are just about the win, and the win to them is that they got their execution. It's not really justice, and it's actually rather shameful. I mean, you wouldn't ask a fourth grader to do what you ask a high school senior or a college graduate to do. But that's what we're asking. That's what the way we're treating the intellectually disabled. And holding such a person accountable in the same way that we would hold a fully formed adult accountable is shameful. It's embarrassing. If I did that to try to coerce somebody like that, you'd probably put me in jail. So, if you think about it that way, it should be, pardon the expression, a no-brainer. We should not be executing people with intellectual disabilities.
So let's move on to the great state of Ohio. And we had a little bit of a discussion yesterday. You were telling me what was going on here as it pertains to the death penalty. So can you give me a little overview of what's going on here?
Sure. So Ohio has had 56 executions, but none since 2018. It's been 4 years since the last execution. And that was under the previous governor, Governor Kasich. Governor DeWine came in the midst of challenges to the lethal injection method of execution, hung his hat on a ruling from a federal judge that this was cruel, that we were prolonging executions by using the drug combination, which made it prolonged punishment. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that's not a problem, but the Ohio Constitution prohibits prolonged and painful executions. So we have that prohibition here in Ohio. So that's a part of it. Now, Governor DeWine has been a prosecutor as Attorney General. He carried out numerous executions, participated in that. But now he gets to put on a different hat. And that's a hat of the governor who gets to look at it with fresh eyes. And that's what we've asked him to do. And this comes in the context also of a full-on examination of Ohio's death penalty, which started back in 2007 when the American Bar Association did an assessment of Ohio and a few other states. Did we meet the basic criteria, the standards for fairness that should be in place for a death penalty trial? Ohio failed to meet those criteria 93% of the time. Okay, well, the Chief Justice, Maureen O'Connor, Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, heard about that and said we have to address it, and appointed a task force, a joint task force on the administration of Ohio's death penalty, joint with the Supreme Court and the State Bar Association. They spent several years, a whole panel of legislators and academics and legal authorities, and there was a victim family representative and defense attorneys, prosecutors, all of them. And they came up, they were not allowed to look at should we have the death penalty, yes or no, but they were looking at how do we make sure the system is fair. They made 56 recommendations, most of which, well, about half are judicial rule changes that have happened, so that's good, but about half need to be legislated, and very few of those have been legislated. And we're talking about there are 13 of them that would impact whether or not we're executing the wrong person. I mean, things that you think are already in place, like requiring that we record interrogations. That is not a requirement right now. There's a Racial Justice Act part of it that would allow for a defendant to say, to try to prove that he or she had was on death row because, in part, of racism and their race. One of the recommendations that we have passed is to prohibit executing people with severe mental illness at the time of the crime. There was a companion to that to prohibit executing people with severe mental illness at the time of punishment, which, what happens to people when we put them in a closet for 30 years. That one has not been discussed. Most of them have not been discussed. So that's the context where we are today. So when Governor DeWine started, we put together an argument, and we were using this with Governor Kasich before him also. If you have a defendant being executed and they wouldn't be on death row had these reforms been in place, you shouldn't be able to execute them now. Okay? So that's sort of what's happening now. Because of the way execution dates are set in Ohio, when you exhaust your appeals, the Attorney General tells the state Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court sets a date. Now, there was a time when they were executing a lot of people here in Ohio. I used to call it the Texas of the North. But they did a couple very in close proximity to them on the calendar. And the Department of Corrections said, we don't want to do more than one a month, because it actually is very taxing on the corrections officials that have to carry out executions. And so because of that, they can't schedule them more than 3 to 4 weeks apart from each other. Ohio has, I think, 30 execution dates currently scheduled from next month into 2025. Okay, now I think we may have seen the last execution in Ohio, because we have, it's a Republican supermajority, but a Republican-sponsored bill to abolish Ohio's death penalty. So we're going to see where that goes. And, usually it takes a few sessions, but, Senator Antonio has been introducing a bill to abolish the death penalty every year since she's been in office. But she's a Democrat and a liberal, and but now that we have, people like Jean Schmidt is the co-sponsor of our bill, and she is a very pro-life, very Republican, very conservative person, and she's in partnership here because she's come, and she was a supporter of the death penalty. She was actually present at the Boston Marathon when that bombing happened. And she had finished the race. She was watching for her sister to catch up and finish the race when the bomb went off. So she saw the aftermath of that bomb, and she initially supported the death penalty for the Boston bomber. And she's come around. She works with us. When his appeal was being heard, because his death sentence was thrown out, and they challenged that at the U.S. Supreme Court, she issued a statement saying we should not have the death penalty, we should not be doing that. So where we're at in Ohio is a space where they're considering getting rid of the death penalty, but we've got all these people stacked up. And I want to flip it around. So, we've got 30 people facing, with execution dates, but when you look at how long they've been there, we've got at least 30 victim families that have been waiting, for some 20 to 30 years, for some 30 to 40 years, for at least one victim. In one case, the guy's been there for more than 40 years. And what we're doing is we're asking those victim family members, wait till we kill them, and then you'll feel better. And we know it's crazy. There was one of the executions that I stood vigil at outside the prison was for a guy, Alton Coleman. and Alton Coleman had I'm sorry, that's what is his name? I get his name right.
Okay.
All right, good.
No problem.
Okey-doke.
He's checking something else.
Oh, he's not on this list because he didn't get killed.
All set?
Alva Campbell, that's it. Alton Coleman was another guy. He was his. Are we ready?
Yeah, all set.
Alton Coleman was his mother threw him in the trash when she was born. When he was born, he grew up. Basically, his mother was a prostitute and a drug addict and all this. He grew up being punished if he got food out of the refrigerator, and he did not get properly potty trained. His mother called him pissy shitty because he always went to the bathroom in his pants. And anyway, he and another person had a multi-state murder spree. And anyway, that's Alton Coleman. But Alva Campbell pretended to be paralyzed and was being moved by a sheriff's deputy and jumped out of the chair, took her gun, and then kidnapped somebody. So he was already in jail, escaped, killed somebody. 20 years later, see, the thing is, this was the very first death case of the prosecutor, of that prosecutor, and they could not find a vein. They knew they were going to have trouble finding a vein because by the time that he got to execution, he was a crippled old man. One lung had been removed, another part of the lung was removed. You look at him, he couldn't do anything to anybody. He could hardly breathe. Because they were concerned that he might have trouble breathing, they created actually a wedge-shaped pillow on that they were going to use on the execution gurney while they're trying to kill him, so that he wouldn't be suffocating too quickly, right? While we could see it, and they knew they were going to have a problem. And they still brought the victim family down and the prosecutor, and they're sitting there, and they poked him 3 times, gave up. And they knew that was likely to happen, but they dragged that victim family down to try to do that. He's one of only a couple of people who have been sent back to their execution chamber, or to their death row cell after literally trying to start the execution. And there's actually 2 cases recently here in Ohio where Ramel Broom is the other person that happened to. They just couldn't get a vein going. Mm-hmm. They couldn't get an IV going. 18 attempts over a couple of hours, and they just couldn't do it, so they sent him back to the cell. He was the first person since 1947 where they tried to kill him and had to stop. And amazingly, the Supreme Court ruled that wasn't a botched execution. I mean, truly, that was a botched execution. It didn't actually happen. But they said it's perfectly fine to kill him again and to try again. He ended up dying of COVID on death row, so that didn't have to happen. But anyway, that's these are the kinds of things
Right.
that we have going on in Ohio. And especially when they brought that victim's family down in the case of Albert Campbell, knowing that wasn't going to happen, but having them come down to the prison and in the witness room, watching them try to get an IV going. I mean, talk about having the rug pulled out from under you, going home, and the guy you've been waiting 20 plus years for that execution is not getting executed.
Wow.
So the good news is that here in Ohio, we have. The good news is that here in Ohio we have an opportunity to end it. We have a Republican-sponsored bill. We know we have the votes in the Senate. The challenge is the Senate president. I think we'll be able to pass this bill.
That's great. That's great.
And if we get a bill to Governor DeWine, he'll sign it because I think it's fair to assess from his behavior that he would prefer not to carry out executions. The challenge here in Ohio, what's been keeping the executions from happening is getting the drugs for lethal injections. The pharmaceutical companies don't want to sell drugs to Ohio for lethal injections. These are legitimately therapeutic drugs. Midazolam is one of them. I've had midazolam. Most people who've had outpatient procedures where you get sedated may have had that. Well, the governor basically said, we've got all these state agencies that use prescription drugs. I'm not going to put that at risk. I'm not going to put Ohioans at risk just so we can carry out executions. But he's also not done anything to try to create a different mechanism for executions. We've got plenty of fentanyl in the evidence lockers, right? We know how deadly that is. Representative Seitz will tell you we've got plenty of rope, plenty of bullets. So what's the holdup? Well, Governor DeWine and Governor Kasich before him basically said we're not changing the method of execution. Okay, so that's where Governor DeWine has hung his hat. But I will tell you that we live in Bexley. I live in Bexley, Ohio, which is the same suburb of Columbus that the governor's mansion is, and Governor DeWine is living at the official governor's residence. And the closest church is the one that my wife sings in the choir at. And when she told me he started going to church there, I said to the priest, hey, can I give you a few things to say to the governor if you get a chance? He said, you don't have to worry about it. We pray to abolish the death penalty at every Mass.
Wow.
So, okay. So I think Governor DeWine, now that he is in charge and he has the final say, is being a true pro-life Catholic, which means consistently pro-life.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So hopefully he will follow through on that.
Right.
He has not done much yet publicly to signal that he would sign a bill if it got to him, but I believe he would.
Yeah.
And certainly he's done, every couple of months there's another order. If the governor's orders come out on Friday afternoons, you get this little notice that says, so-and-so has been reprieved and rescheduled for execution at this time. Sometimes it does 2 or 3 at a time. And just reshuffle them, push them to the end of the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. Yeah, it would be great if, you finally abolish it, and he comes out and says it, that'd be great. So,
Well, the question will be what happens to everybody that's currently on death row,
yeah,
because Ohio will be the first state to, just think, New Jersey, New Mexico, Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Colorado, Virginia. Yeah, Ohio will be the first state with, right now, more than 100 people on death row.
mm-hmm.
All those others that I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
had, fewer than 10,
Mm-hmm.
or Illinois might have had 20 or so by that point, because everybody on Illinois' death row had been taken off in 2001 by Governor Ryan, a Republican pro-death penalty governor who almost executed an innocent person, and then said, "Wait a minute," and appointed a blue ribbon panel to, evaluate what do we need to change to make sure we don't execute an innocent person. And they did their work and made all these recommendations, and he couldn't get one of them heard in Illinois legislature. In part because he was having a big fight with the legislature over other issues, and of course he ended up going to jail, prison for corruption. I don't know if he was guilty of that or not, but he was a hero in our book. He told them, if you don't make these fixes to prevent the execution of a wrong person, then I'm going to have to commute all these sentences, and that's what he did. So that's always the question: is what happens after an abolition bill passes? Does the governor commute the sentences to life in prison, or does it just leave people? And what we've seen in New Mexico and in Connecticut, where they've left the people, is that the courts end up throwing out those death sentences and changing them to life terms.
Well, that kind of answers a question I was going to ask later on about alternatives. They seem pretty simple, but
Yeah, well, the alternative to the death penalty is throw away the key or long-term incarceration. Death penalty action doesn't endorse a particular alternative, but we recognize that in the United States, if you don't have a death penalty, the alternative is life without the possibility of parole, at least for a long period of time. Now, we believe that there should be the possibility of parole. That gives people hope. It also keeps prison workers safer, because somebody doesn't want to screw up if it's going to invalidate their chances for eventual parole. But nobody's getting out in anything less than 20 or 30 years. And the idea of the possibility of parole doesn't mean you got to get it. You'll just come up for it. That's, in fact, it is the reality, coming to understand the reality of life without parole, of true life sentencing, that has actually moved some legislators to be opposed to the death penalty. Not because they don't want the person killed, but they like the idea that they're going to suffer more by having to just live out their life in prison. And they're not alone. I mean, when Timothy McVeigh was executed, more than half of the victim families opposed the execution. Some because they'd come to forgiveness, and others because they thought it would be a more harsh punishment for Timothy McVeigh, who was a relatively young guy, to just have to live his life in total isolation. And they've got you out at the Supermax in Colorado. That is like, you never have human contact, and that alone is torture. So if you want to torture him, then that's what you do. We don't advocate that. You got to look to the examples of how they do things in most European countries, for example, where the goal is rehabilitation. And if you're a person that simply can't be rehabilitated, then there's a hospital, not a prison. I mean, obviously it's a prison hospital, but it's different. And it's not a waste of resources the way it is here. And you're not selling victim families a bill of goods that when you kill them, you'll feel better. But the vast majority of people who could get a death sentence end up with a life sentence. And that's what people don't understand. It's not the worst of the worst who are getting executed. It's the people with the worst lawyers, the people who don't have enough money, it's the people who kill white people. It's the mentally ill and the intellectually disabled still.
Well, let's switch to a different state. Let's talk about Oklahoma. and the recent announcement that they're planning to execute 25 people between now and December 2024, I believe. If I remember correctly, reading that.
It's 2 years worth of executions.
So almost like they're trying to keep up with Ohio, or what Ohio has 30 people on death row, but it's not the same, I guess, because you just explained what's going on in the state.
Well, what happened in Oklahoma is similar to other states where lawsuits by the prisoners challenging the method of execution held things up. So there were 25 people who had part of a lawsuit challenging lethal injection in Oklahoma, and others that weren't party to the lawsuit. They're the ones that got executed last year because they weren't party to the lawsuit. Well, the lawsuit was, the trial was in February, and quickly decided that lethal injection by the Oklahoma method is not unconstitutional. So then they immediately set the dates. Now, one thing that's happening is that there's an election. There's an attorney general election, there's a governor election, and death penalty is good to get your name in the media over and over and over again. And we could definitely see that being used by Governor Stitt, especially around the Julius Jones case, where you had another case of potential wrongful conviction. Guy might be innocent. The parole board made a recommendation for clemency. The governor in Oklahoma cannot grant clemency without a recommendation of the parole board. In that case, they did. And he waited until like 2 hours before the execution time. Might have been 4 hours, something like that. I forget what time it was set, but he waited until the last minute. We were already assembling in front of the prison in McAllister, Oklahoma, to protest that execution when we heard. But the whole point of that exercise, because he had to know he wasn't going to execute Julius Jones, but just get your name in the over and over again. You would think. So anyway, when the court threw out that lawsuit, and they set dates, and they set 25 execution dates to go, over 2 years. And the first one is scheduled for later this month, August 25th. Now that person has a recommendation for clemency, so we'll see what happens. The next guy is a guy that's important, Richard Glossop. This case is important because Richard Glossop had 3 execution dates. He's had 3 last meals. The last time was in 2015. And he got about 2 hours from execution. And they realized that they had ordered the wrong drugs. That's the reason Richard Glossop is still alive today. They ordered the wrong drugs. And in the meantime, his advocates were able to go and talk to legislators and say, there's too much doubt here. This guy, nobody even says he committed this crime. Somebody else committed the murder and asked for his help, and he helped move the body. That's as much as he did. And these legislators said, okay, well, let's reinvestigate the case. And they got an outside independent law firm to reinvestigate the case. They put untold, no restriction on resources. It would seem 30 attorneys spent hundreds of attorney hours reinvestigating this case and came back with a report saying Richard Glossop is innocent. Now, when they released this report in a press conference at the Oklahoma Capitol, Representative McDougal said, if we execute Richard Glossop, I'll work to abolish the death penalty. And he's a very pro-death penalty guy. And they're saying we need to execute these other guys, but not Glossop. And the thing I want to say to him is, if it took 3 execution dates that didn't happen, and you were ready to kill him all 3 of those times, but then when you had 30 independent attorneys investigate it and find that he's innocent, shouldn't we be doing that level of investigation in every case? what about the history of malfeasance and corruption in Oklahoma, in particular Oklahoma City, with a particular forensic scientist, Joyce Gilchrist? You know, we know she was making stuff up in favor of the police, and they're still executing some of those people. So one day, Representative McDougal and others like him will wake up and realize, you know, if we can't put 30 lawyers on every case, then maybe we should not be having the death penalty.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you're saying, you know, do you really trust the government to get it right 100%
Yeah.
of the time? Because they don't.
They don't. And actually, I love that, you know, we have a banner that says, do you trust the government? Because of that whole dichotomy in our society of people that say they don't trust the government.
Mm-hmm. I remember seeing some video, watching a video you on YouTube where you really spoke to that. You know, people, like you said, today don't trust the government for whatever reason. So why do you trust the government with this? You don't even trust the government to get the roads.
Yeah.
Like you said, the roads right,
Well,
or fixing the roads.
We can't trust the government to tax us fairly, to come up with a vaccine, to fix the roads properly. How are we trusting them with the power to kill? You know, and I'm saying that a little bit facetiously, but it's the same people out there saying, you know, we can't trust the government and don't give up our guns and all of that, who are also the kill 'em all crowd.
Yeah.
You know, so you can't have it both ways.
Exactly right.
And I agree, we can't trust the government, not with the power to kill.
Mm-hmm. And you know that just you and Brian Stevenson say the same thing. You know?
Really?
Yeah. You can't trust, you know, the government to kill. The government should not have the power to kill.
Yeah.
And I think Sister Helen Prejean, in our interview with her, she talked about how any society, I forget what she says, it's something about any society that gives the government total power or absolute control over the life and death of a person is going to eventually abuse it. And because there's no checks and balances, there's no one watching them. So yeah, you're in good company. They're in good company with you. You know, it makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about one of the recent executions in Alabama. Matthew Reeves. And let's talk about that a little bit because there was, you know, and what you do, you often have Zoom vigils and things like that. Let's talk about that, some of the things that you guys do, and then let's get into what happened with Matthew Reeves. He was actually one of the cases that I wanted to focus on in the film. But talk to us a little bit about
Do you know what his IQ was? I'm trying to remember.
It was 68.
Borderline.
Yeah, it was like borderline. But you know, people with 70, 75 IQs can still have intellectual disability.
Yeah.
Because you can't just, the Supreme Court has said you can't just use that number. You know. But let's talk about Matthew Reeves because something transpired.
Yeah. So, you know, with COVID, what we started to do was create online prayer and protest vigil sort of opportunities for people to participate. It's actually something that I would continue even without the pandemic, simply because it's been a powerful opportunity for people who would never be able to go and protest outside the prison to come together and to be together in these moments. So we've been creating these ever since they started executing people after the pandemic was here. Matthew Reeves had a date. He had an appeal before the U.S. Supreme Court questioning whether he should be killed because of his intellectual disability. And in Alabama, one of the issues is that you get to choose whether to be executed by the gas chamber or by lethal injection. Now, Alabama doesn't actually have, they haven't tested it yet. They now have a functioning, they've got a gas chamber built. And we've actually been successful, our movement, in getting the company that built that to back away from its contract. But it's built. It still needs to be tested. But at some point, they passed out a form to everybody on death row saying, you get to choose, but you got to choose now, lethal injection or gas chamber. Everybody that chose gas chamber is on hold because they don't have a gas chamber that's functioning yet. The idea is using nitrogen hypoxia, so hopefully not cyanide like they do out in Arizona. But if you didn't choose, then you default to lethal injection. And Matthew Reeves is one of those people that didn't know what to do with that form and couldn't get to his attorneys in time, and nobody helped him. So he defaulted to lethal injection. And but there was an appeal based on the violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act to the U.S. Supreme Court. And as happens, the Supreme Court was taking its time. So we're in the middle of our vigil. We're praying, people are offering songs, people are praying, people are just talking about these issues. And Matthew calls his friend Carol, who's on the vigil. Often we'll try to bring somebody that knows the person being killed. Well, he called her and she put him on. And we were able to say greetings, and to immediately somebody started praying with and for him. And then there was a pause in that, and he was given the opportunity to speak, and he basically said, I didn't want to interrupt your prayer, but I want to thank you all, and I don't know what's happening. I haven't heard from my attorneys, and they're starting to gather, there's people gathering outside my cell. And it was while he was talking that I actually got a note saying that his stay had been overturned and his execution was going to go forward. And there was this moment of, a pregnant pause, if you will, and I think I said, a dirty word, and it was just devastating to all of us because, we tried to get Matthew back on the line, but that was over. And then it was just a matter of minutes. They took him, they killed him. We heard that he had a time of death. And, that was just a really, really hard one because it's the first time I can remember, it's the first time and the only time so far that we've actually had a direct conversation with the prisoner who's waiting to be killed. And then he goes off and is killed. I had a communications person that we had hired a few months earlier that was part of, handling the Zoom jockeying and, supporting us. And she had come on for her technical abilities, but then certainly was with us on the death penalty, but new to working on the death penalty. And we had just agreed that we were going to keep her going because it was a fixed term. But she called me 2 days later after that vigil and said, I just can't do this. It was too heavy for her. And it was heavy for all of us. It was devastating. So, we've got that on video, that's one of the things about doing this work is the trauma that's absorbed, the trauma that people don't even realize is happening. I mean, I don't even know what's been, what the level of trauma is in me. My first round number execution was the 400th, and we're at 1,548. So I don't normally get deeply involved in cases, but on occasion I do, and it can be pretty hard.
It's interesting you brought that up because I wanted to talk about the toll that it takes on you, and the volunteers, because I did see that video, and it was like all of you at the same time got a punch in the gut, and it was just some silence for a while, and I could tell it was like the wind was taken out of you. You know, so I mean, what have you noticed? I mean, let's talk a little bit more about how it affects you, the trauma, your colleagues. You know, how what do you see?
Can I have a minute to go to the
Yeah,
bathroom?
yeah. Anytime, bro. Yeah. You know, and that's, you know, just looking at the parole boards and the fact that they don't. It just seems like they don't take all that stuff into consideration. It just seems like it's just bent on. They're just bent on revenge.
It doesn't outweigh, in some of their minds,
Yeah.
the gravity of what was done.
Right.
And it's really hard to understand how somebody can, hurt people in the ways that they sometimes do. I mean, Gilbert Postel was part of a group of people that went and killed 4 or 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Grant killed 2 women in a botched robbery.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't botched; he got
Yeah.
away, right?
Mm-hmm.
But and it was awful because you had recordings and you had
Yeah.
calling for help and you had just a bloody mess,
Right.
crime scene photos.
Yep.
But none of that changes the fact that Donald Grant had intellectual disability and mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And when he finally presented and was
Yeah.
asked by the members of the parole board, questions, you could tell
Yeah.
that he was not a fully developed person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Doesn't excuse what he did,
Right.
but we don't have to treat people, especially people like that, with execution.
Right.
We can throw away the key
Mm-hmm.
and be safe from them and hold them accountable, but not fall to their level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I just really feel, I don't know, just talking with him and I just felt like, wow, this guy only has hours to live and he's giving me some of his time.
Yeah, well,
Like 2 hours of his time in an interview. It's just,
Donald Grant lives in what you're creating.
yeah. Yeah, well, I made a promise to him and to his brother. So we're going to get this film done and tell his story. But, so we talked about Matthew Reeves. You spoke about Gilbert Postel. You just talked about Donald. So, I mean, when you talk about mobilization and everything like that, how do you guys get people to take interest or to listen to you? Because there's so many things going on in the world, so many issues, so many social justice issues. How do you do what you do?
Well, I care about a lot of issues. I came into this work through Amnesty International, which is an international human rights organization that works on a variety of issues. When I started, it was focused on freeing prisoners of conscience and getting fair and prompt trials for political prisoners and stopping torture and executions and keeping it very focused. Since then, they've sort of expanded what they work on, but I had an experience then. I was invited to go and work with the family of Cesar Chavez, the farm worker leader out in California. And it was supposed to be a short-term thing to help my friend who was a part of the executive director, the first executive director of the Chavez Foundation after Cesar passed away. So I went out to be helpful to him. But in doing that, I got exposed to a much bigger issue, the issue of immigration and farm workers and labor law and labor issues. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and again, my grounding is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the right to life, the right not to be persecuted for your identity, the right to a fair trial. Those are just a few of more than 20 rights that are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I remember sitting there and hearing these farm workers talk about pesticides in the field and being sprayed while they're working in the field, and how damaging that is, and how difficult it is to take your children to see the doctor when you're a migrant because you don't have a doctor and you don't have enough money, and you want your kids in school but you don't have the power to but you're worried about that. But all these things, education, healthcare, enough to eat, safe working conditions, all of these are also enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But sometimes the people that are persecuted by governments are the people that are working to better their condition, and they're working to get their rights respected. Okay, so I feel very privileged here in the United States that I don't feel at all threatened by the government for challenging the government, which is what I do. I've never been afraid to stand up to, police or legislators or whomever. We sued the Indiana State Police during the federal executions in Terre Haute. They were setting up roadblocks 2 miles out from the prison, and we wanted to be inside of the prison. They backed off really, really quickly once we filed that lawsuit. But that was a right to freedom of assembly and a right to access and a right to, the government has to operate in the sunlight such that it can, or that you can see anything from outside the prison fences. But if we don't stand up when we see an injustice, then we're saying it's okay. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we have, because people don't want to know what's happening beyond the edge of their front yard, because if they do and they don't do something about it, they're saying it's okay. Now that's a kind of a big stretch, but I think it's true. And that's why I see as my calling is, look for ways to help people know, wait, this is happening, it's being done in your name. And at the very least, you can stand up and say, wait, no, I oppose that. And what we ask people to do is contact their elected officials, contact their state and federal members of the legislatures, contact the governor, contact the president. Tell them, I don't agree with that. So at least they know you don't agree with it. And then we can work to change the law. Not a lot of things I'm happy about with Justice Antonin Scalia, but one of the things he said is people who protest at the U.S. Supreme Court are barking up the wrong tree. You've got to go across the street and change the law. So that's what we've been focused on, and we've been able to do it in a number of states. I was the field manager in New Jersey when we abolished the death penalty in New Jersey in 2007. Then I was hired by the National Coalition to abolish the death penalty. My first thing that I did there was, Diane said, go find out what's happening in New Mexico. We abolished the death penalty in New Mexico in 2009. And when I started, when she said that to me, we went and identified that there was people going again. They just hired somebody. We helped make sure they got some money and did some training. And I was in New Mexico quite a bit. Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland. In Maryland, the Maryland group came to us and said, will you help? And we said, yes, but give us something substantive. So I was put in charge of organizing in the Senate President's District. Now in Maryland, the Senate, and most places, the Senate President is like God. He or she decides what's going to happen, what bill goes into the drawer, and what bill moves forward. And Senate President Miller in Maryland was holding it all up and appointed a member of a criminal justice committee to be the stop. Right? So I had Bobby Zirkin and Senator Miller as my targets, and we worked it for a couple of years. Got to the point where somebody mentioned, a constituent in his office mentioned the death penalty, and he threw them out. He was so sick of hearing about it. We had about 75 people on the list when we started it, and by the time we finished, I had over 500 people who live in his district. Okay, and this is important because it helps you understand it doesn't take that many people to help a legislator know that this is what his people want,
Mhm.
or her people.
Yeah.
And the best example for that is my experience in New Jersey, where I was the field manager, and in the final months of the campaign, there was an election happening, and then often the controversial bills go during the lame duck session after the election before the legislature changes. And but in those final months, while they were campaigning, we went underground. We were not doing high visibility actions. We weren't doing a lot of stuff in the media. I was just going to other groups, the Sierra Club, the League of Women Voters, church Bible study groups, giving them a 5-minute wrap. This is what's happening. We have the opportunity. And then inviting people to write to their members of the legislature, handwritten notes. I oppose the death penalty. Please pass the bill to abolish the death penalty. And we would space those out as to how often we'd send them, how many, so that there was a steady trickle of letters coming into their offices from their constituents. Okay, so my own state senator, Diane Allen, a Republican, never told us where she was on the bill. She was also a Quaker, so he had a little taste of it, maybe. But in any case, hers was not even the district I live in wasn't a targeted district. I was all over the state of New Jersey, and where we wanted to make sure that people were getting a little bit of constituent love or pressure, as the case may be. In any case, after the vote, she wrote a letter to everybody who had written to her, and she said, I had more than 200 pieces of constituent communication about this bill, and only 10 of them said to not pass it. Okay, this is out of a district of 70,000 people, and she had 200 communications. And I mobilized, myself and the other partners and allies and organizations that got our people to do something, and those who actually did do something. 200 letters was enough to make her feel confident in her vote. Okay, and that's so it's really, we don't have to change everybody's minds. We just have to find the people who agree with us and get them to do something. Because it doesn't take that much to exert pressure on an elected official. You just have to know what's the message, what's the pressure points, and get that pressure applied, right? Doesn't always work that way, but that was a big lesson for me, and it's informed my career ever since. So, right now we're going into states that have are high-use states where the death penalty is entrenched, and the method there is a little bit different. It's create a big scene, try to get loud, boisterous crowds when you can. But same thing in Oklahoma in 2016, there was a referendum to write the death penalty into the state constitution. And when I heard about that, the polling was at 72% in support. And I called up my friends in Oklahoma. I said, can we come? You want to do something? We created a campaign. And we tried our best to get earned media coverage. We got some coverage, through the mass media, because we couldn't afford TV commercials and all that. But as an experiment, we decided that we were going to go door to door in one precinct and talk to voters in every single household where there were voters in that precinct. And we picked deliberately a very red, Republican, always votes Republican precinct. And that was the election where Donald Trump was running, right? So it's going to have a high turnout, and state question 776 was our thing. Now in that precinct, all the usual suspects won by the levels that they would normally win, but one thing lost, and that was state question 776, because we went door to door and explained to people why this was unnecessary, and why the death penalty is bad. And it wasn't just a tiny percentage. I think we got about 56% of the vote.
Wow.
Okay, which is a significant, that's a landslide in some people's books. And it's only because the people were educated. It's only because we went and actually knocked on the door and had the conversation and gave them time to think and information that they could follow up with on their own. And that's what you have to do in this kind of thing. But that's how I know.
Mm-hmm.
And what drives me. I know we can win this. I know we can move people because I was moved. I like to argue. I often feel like I'm right. But I've also learned that if I'm not right, it's much better to admit it and move on than to try to be entrenched and say, you're just wrong because you're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing that, you know, it may only take like a you know, 200, 300, 400, you know, letters, and you can sway or you can control.
And we were doing,
direction.
you know, handwritten notes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only things that I
that's
could
it, yeah.
count
Mm-hmm.
was the handwritten notes. Emails, phone calls,
Yeah.
you know, those are important, but they don't count in the same. The weight is much greater with a letter or a handwritten note that comes in the postal mail. That's what gets put in front of the legislator.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it is, well, we had, you know, 75 phone calls and 30 were against, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, the others were for, and you know, but the handwritten notes get put in front of the legislator.
Man, you giving everybody education right now.
That's what we all need to do.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
live in a state where there's a death penalty, then you need to just find out who your state representatives are,
Right.
your governor, and write to them. If you live anywhere in the United States, whether you're a citizen, you don't have to be 18, whatever, they represent you at Congress. And
Mhm.
you can, you know, deathpenaltyaction.org, or just find out who your members of Congress are. You have 2 state senators, 2 U.S. senators in your state, and then a representative, and write to all 3. Write to the president, whoever the president is, and tell them what you think about this issue. And ask them to work for change, and to pass a bill to abolish the death penalty. If we all did that, everybody that's watching this, everybody that cares about this issue, everybody that believes in those words, equal justice under law, the ideal, if you want to make that the reality, one step
Yeah.
is to abolish the death penalty.
I have this theory that a lot of people, they say, oh, the country's going in the wrong direction and all this other stuff. And I always put it back on the people. Because in some form or fashion, it's our fault. You know?
If we're not holding them
if we're not
accountable.
holding them accountable. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here. You've answered so many questions. We talked about alternatives.
I'm going to stop. Alrighty.
I think we only got maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So, talking about, why do you think so many Americans are kind of just turn a blind eye to this whole issue of the death penalty, and they seem to accept the fact that the government is going to make some mistakes. Intellectually, they know that people will make mistakes and not do things 100% correctly all the time. What is it? Is it just about education? You were talking about how you guys went to every person's place, every person's house, and you asked questions and things of that nature, and you educated them. Do you think it's just a situation where it's a lack of education? Do you think people lack empathy, or what do you think?
Well, I think it's all of the above and none, right? I mean, we all have busy lives, and everybody's got some issue that they care about, even if it's that they haven't had a proper vacation. I mean, everybody's got something that they think about. And, so to find people that care enough about my issue, whatever my issue is, and get them to then do something, that's the challenge. And if somebody is not there yet, doesn't want to be there, whatever, I'm not going to waste my time with them. People have all manner of issues, and you don't even know the half of it. I mean, I knock on somebody's door, and I don't know that they're the caretaker for a parent dying of Alzheimer's in the back room. So I'm not going to hold people to account for them not showing up on my thing, but that's why it's important to be out there and visible. Wear the T-shirt, wear the button, give people an invitation to say, "Oh, what's that about?" Or, "Oh, I heard about that case," you know, and that's really our challenge. Is I don't expect everybody to get on board on my issue. The death penalty is like a tiny little thing compared to police brutality, over incarceration, homelessness, hunger, education problems. I mean, there's all these issues, and hopefully people do something about one that they care about. I fell into this one. I'm grateful that I'm not like so many of my friends who were dragged into it unwillingly, either as victim family members or as somebody that got arrested and incarcerated, guilty or not, or their family members. And especially if you're one of those people that is impacted, just going through your day in a survival mode, having been impacted by violent crime, that's enough. That's sometimes impossible, So definitely it's a burden. So for us, we try to make it easy for those who find us, who want to do something, to say, "Yeah, I'll sign a petition." "Yeah, I'll write a little note." "Yes, I'll make a donation or a phone call." I'll show up at, there's, again, it's all these different levels of engagement, from simply waving your hand and saying, "Here I am and I'm with these people," all the way to showing up and being the person that helps deliver the message.
Okay. Just a question here. How would you define justice? In your opinion, your idea of justice, so many times we hear, like I remember reading something about Governor Ivey down in Alabama, and I used to live there, so I still kind of, keep up, and, she said something, or somebody from her office talked about, it's about justice for the family, but the victim's family. But in that case, with Joe Jones, the family said, "Hey, that's not justice for us."
Faith Hill's family
Yeah.
wanted her memory to be better than about another murder, another killing in their name, and that was what was so astounding. That the governor Ivey in Alabama said that this is justice and we need to get it, even though the victims, it's as if they don't even know what's good for them, right? Interestingly, the next execution scheduled, also the victim family doesn't want the death penalty. So that's not a rare thing. It's a little unusual, but it happens regularly. And of course, we work with many murder victim family members who oppose the death penalty. No amount of killing is going to give us back our loved ones, right? So what's justice? I think justice is it's so often out of reach, but it's not an eye for an eye, and it's not vengeance. It's, is everybody safe now? Is a person who did something wrong held accountable? They're given the opportunity to make amends if possible. People often cite an eye for an eye, but actually the rabbinic interpretation is you can't have an eye for an eye because no two eyes are alike. So whenever anybody thumps on the Bible, especially if they're using Hebrew scriptures, well, first, if you go with the Gospels, then Jesus said, "I tell you different," and we're not doing that.
Right.
But if you're going to go with what's in the Hebrew scriptures, then you have to go with not the fundamentalist interpretation, because Jews don't do that. We're the only ones that go by the Hebrew scriptures. You have to go by the current rabbinic interpretation of what's in the Bible. And for 2,000 years, that has not allowed the death penalty. The death penalty is there, it's in the scriptures, it's in Jewish law, but there are so many preconditions that must be in place before you could have a halachic execution according to Jewish law, that it's impossible. So, we've got a whole resource section on our webpage just about what Judaism has to say about the death penalty. And another section about Christianity. We're working on one for Muslims. And at the end of the day, if you're really truly grounded in spirituality and in the teachings of your faith, it's very hard to stand by the death penalty.
Was it? There was a pastor. I remember watching one of the Zoom vigils, and she shared a story about how her mother and her sister were two people that were killed. Dylan Roof killed them in that
Yeah.
church.
Sharon Risher.
Yeah.
Reverend
Yeah.
Sharon Risher. She's on our board of directors. That's the church shooting in Charleston.
Yeah.
And yeah, she's.
I'll just tell you, it's hard. It would be hard for me to forgive someone like that. It's difficult, and the fact that because anyone can say, oh well, you have to forgive and all this other stuff, but for someone that actually is their loved one was murdered, and you have to go through that process. And I remember she talked about how at first she was like,
No way.
get him, and then as time went on,
She was angry because
Yes.
at Dylan Roof's arraignment, people from that church did get up and say, we forgive you. Okay, but what we have to keep in mind is that forgiveness is really not about the person who's forgiven, it's for the person who forgives. That's why forgiveness is also a major tenet of the teachings of all the major religions. Because Suzanne Bosler is another person, and also Sharon Risher have said, forgiveness did more for me than I'll ever do for the killer. Okay, I don't even know if they understand that I've forgiven them, but I no longer have to harbor hatred and vengeance, and if I did, it would tear me up. So I don't want to have to wake up every day thinking, how do I get this guy back for what he did to my loved one? I can move forward and remember my loved one for who they were, not for how they died.
Right. So I think we're done with a lot of the questions that I had. Now I want to ask you, like we always do, is there anything I missed here? Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed? Any, if you want to put like a little exclamation point on one point or whatever.
I think we pretty well covered that. The most important thing is that people, if you care about this issue, that you find a way to invest yourself in it, to make sure your members of Congress understand where you stand, and if you have a way to help this movement, that you do so, whether as a volunteer or a donor or somehow. Even just telling people, hey, I saw this film and you got to watch it, is a way to help, and that's what people need to do.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sitting down with us. This is awesome, man. This is awesome. So I know you got a phone call. So maybe after the phone call, we can look at doing some B-roll.
Yeah.
And
what is your plan? When are you all leaving?
we leave tomorrow.
Okay.
And I planned it that